That's what he's here for. Be careful on the way in Thursday. Opening the hearings on HB 2230. It's updating the statutes relating to the Kansas Army and Air National Guard and providing for appointments of the state judge advocate. Would the reviser please give us a briefing, please?
Good morning, committee. House Bill 2230 provides for the appointment of a state judge advocate and updates certain statutes relating to the Kansas Army and Air National Guard. Section 1 provides for the appointment of a state judge advocate. The adjutant general, with the approval of the governor, shall appoint an officer as a state judge advocate. A candidate must meet the requirements of a judge advocate in KSA 48-2101 and amendments thereto to be considered for the position. Section 1 also provides for the promotion of a state judge advocate to the rank of brigadier general. Section 8 amends KSA 48-214 to include the position of a state judge advocate on the Kansas Military Board. The remaining sections of House Bill 2230 contain technical amendments to bring the statutes in line with modern drafting practices. House Bill 2230 would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I can stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Are there any questions? Any questions? Representative Dodson?
I did have a couple of questions. One is, do we understand now that there is no state judge advocate?
At this time, there is no state judge advocate. I believe there's a position in the definitions of a judge advocate, but not a state judge advocate.
The reason I'm asking that, because when we present the bill, we want to make sure that we mention that the difference. And then on some of the following pages, in other words, when you introduce on section 1, it says establishes and so on. And then when you get down in lines 21 to 26, I think it is on 7. You have the bill.
I do.
On page 7 from 6 to 13, it's talking about trial by court martial. Is there no longer a trial by court martial?
I cannot speak to whether or not that still exists. I just know this removes it from this particular statute.
I had sent Major Newbold a couple of obtuse questions this morning, so we can hear from her later. I think those were the two major things I wanted to get clarity on before we go forward.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you very much. Now, proponents of this, Major.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on HB 2230 on behalf of the Adjutant General's Department, and thank you for your continued support of our men and women in the Kansas National Guard. I'm Major Carrie Beth Newhold, and I work legislative affairs for the Adjutant General's Department. So Chapter 48 outlines the makeup and the operations of the militia and defense of the state of Kansas, and this includes the administrative, operational, and disciplinary structure of the Kansas Army and Air National Guard. Since the initial adoption in 1901 of many of the provisions in Chapter 48 and the last significant revision in 1988, the structure and operations of the Kansas National Guard and that of the other 53 guards in the United States have drastically changed. Air Force instructions, Army regulations, policies, and procedure now fill previous gaps that required attention of the states. For example, the United States Army now has a robust regulation concerning the collection of amounts owed for lost equipment, which negates the need for the utilization and existence of KSA 48219. So the proposed changes in this bill would include updating and removing antiquated provisions from Articles 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as well as ensuring consistency of language concerning selection, qualifications, and appointment of judge advocates. This modernization of the language in Chapter 48 would ensure that the Kansas National Guard soldiers and airmen are following statutes that are in line with the Army and Air Force regulations, policy, and procedure. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I stand ready for any questions you may have.
Questions? I do believe you have some amendments.
Yes, sir.
Would you please pass those out at this time?
And while those are getting passed out, Representative Dodson, to answer your two questions. So we do have a state judge advocate now. The issue in the current language is that it's mentioned in multiple places and some of the language is not consistent. So that's what this amendment does, is it takes it out of it puts it all in one spot and makes it consistent across the board. And then we haven't done a court martial for over 2 decades, simply because we don't have the resources, and most serious crimes are handled by local law enforcement anyways. So there's not really any opportunity for that.
And if they're federalized, they're used UCMJ under federal authority for court martial or whatever else.
Yes, sir. Okay, so the amendments that we had were just a couple of cleanup things that we didn't catch before it got published. So most of the things you'll see, the bubbles over to the side, are just clarifying words. There are 2 that are paragraph form. So the first one would be in section 205, and that is to clarify that the number of assistant adjutant generals is authorized by NGB, or National Guard Bureau, excuse me. So instead of having a certain number in the state statute, that would be set by our federal level. So Congress sets the in-strength numbers and the numbers of generals of each service, and then National Guard Bureau then passes that out to the state. So they say, based on your force structure, you earn this many general officers. So that gets this section in line with that. And then on section 206, that paragraph that I believe is on the very back page, that is, again, just to align that federal regulation of the property and fiscal officer. So each state is given a Title 10, an active duty property and fiscal officer who is in charge of maintaining and oversight of federal monies and equipment.
Yes,
Oh, Major, on the bill itself at the beginning, line 12, wait a minute. Nope, 11, sorry. Adjutant General, the approval of the governor shall appoint an officer. Oh, I missed it, sorry. It's appointing, oh, there it is, on 15, appointing as many assistants to the state judge advocate as the adjutant general considers necessary. What are the circumstances under which assistance would be needed?
So it depends on the caseload, I would say, in that regard. And I couldn't get back to you with a better answer on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Are there any neutrals on this bill? Any neutrals? Well, next Thursday, we will work this, take a look at the amendments, bring some good questions if you have any. We will work this on Thursday. We'll close the hearing on this, and we'll open the hearing on HB 2378. 2378. authorizing the Secretary of Administration on behalf of Kansas Department, authorize the Secretary of Administration to Aging and Disability Service to convey lands in Shawnee County to the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs. Do we have any proponents? Oh, revisers need to read that first. Thank you. Keep me in line here.
House Bill 2378 would authorize the Secretary of Administration to convey all of the rights, title, and interest in approximately 15 acres of land to the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. House Bill 2378 states that the Secretary of Administration, in consultation with the Secretary for Aging and Disability Services and the Director of the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office, shall determine the specific parcel of real estate that will be conveyed to the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. No conveyance of real estate shall be made until the correct legal description, deeds, and conveyances have been reviewed and approved by the Attorney General. House Bill 2378 will take effect upon publication in the statute book. I could stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any questions? Thank you. Proponents for HB 2378. Yes, sir. Please give your name and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for inviting us here today so we can testify on behalf of this bill. It's very important to our organization. I'm Eric Roller. I'm the Deputy Director for the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office, and the Director regrets that he cannot be here himself. He's actually in front of appropriations right now defending our budget, so that's pretty important as well. So with that, this is kind of the last piece of the puzzle, with the exception of getting the grant from the federal VA, as you know, and most of this you've probably already heard, but just want to recap a little bit on what has led us up to this point. In March 2021, actually prior to that, I know the House and Senate both introduced their bills to compel the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office to submit a grant with the federal VA. And at the same time, the governor wrote an executive order and signed that. So that kind of directed us to submit the grant by April of last year. And we did that. We did the pre-approval, the pre-application, the VA calls that. It's very basic, a couple sheets of paper to get our foot in the door. And then in July of 2022, we submitted the final well-developed application for the grant program. And at the same time, during that same session, you may be aware or may be on the understanding that the $10.5 million in bonding was also approved during that time, which subsequently was upped the previous session to $17.2 million to build the home, our 35% portion of the home. Well, that's pretty much all the way up to the last year, about mid-year, a 9-member panel committee reviewed the applications for the home, and they narrowed it down to 2 different locations. And then the fall of 2022 is when the 3-person selection panel actually made their recommendation to the governor, and the governor announced that earlier in January of this year. And of course, that location is the parcel of land that is mentioned in this bill. As such, we do support this legislation to transfer the parcel from KDADS, or Kansas Department of Aging Disability Services, to the Kansas Commission on Veterans Affairs Office. So I think you all also have that map where the overlay of our concept design is being placed on that parcel, and this is a perfect match, and it maintains the flexibility required to continue the architectural design that we planned, as well as any future expansion if needed. So With that, I will stand for questions.
Are there any questions? Any questions? Representative Dodson.
Now, can you just kind of walk through the expected timeline and steps from here forward after we get this bill approved? What happens next and when? Thanks.
Yes, sure. The actual timeline is again very flexible, and it all depends on if we actually make the priority list this year. And as you can see in this bill, if we don't make the list, then we don't have the land transfer. It doesn't take place. We just have to go back and reapply again. So the expected ribbon cutting or finished product where we can start taking veterans and family members as residents into this home is hopefully in the 24-25 timeframe. Again, it all depends on this initial the grant actually getting accepted and us being placed high enough on the priority list to receive some funding this fiscal year. So that's the important part. Then of course, once we do that, we actually already have not every state attaches money with their portion of the money with their application. Kansas did that. We were able to do that thanks to you all last year. Putting the $17.2 million or $17.5 million up for our, again, 35%. So counting backwards from 24-25, we do have the 35% concept by later, if everything is approved and we are on the list, then we will have the architects and engineers continue on with that final design, and hopefully we can break ground later this year. And if that happens, then we'll be right on track for opening of 24-25. That's all best case scenario. So obviously a lot of things have to fall in place to that. Was there any specific time of other times that you would like, Representative?
No, I think the general nature of this, we just need to make sure we get the funding from the VA, and our federal representatives are ready to help. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Representative Hill? Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, is the money, the 17 million, it has already been appropriated, or is it in this year's appropriation?
Okay, it is actually in the 23, it's in the 22 session, but the governor was proposed in her budget this year to do away with the bond and actually use SIBF funding, which is very important for us as well. Obviously, we'll save some money in the long term.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
If the VA does not accept this or approve of this, do we start back over at ground zero, or is this an ongoing application?
Mr. Chair. Yes, that we do start. We start back at the beginning. However, for instance, last year there was 180 million roughly dollars that the federal VA put towards projects, and that only funded 2 projects because they were big projects. So this year, those that applied last year also go back in the pool. So all we have to do is resubmit. So we'll go back in the pool again.
One final question, if I may. You mentioned the 2 different selection panels, and what is the methodology behind that? Why did we have a 9-member panel and then a 3-member panel to select the site?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I'm going to have to defer that to the Director Turner. He actually headed that up, and I know it was so the first panel was comprised of several members, including some of the service organizations and the architect engineer, the Eastern Kansas Healthcare Director Clover over at the Eastern Kansas Healthcare Hospital here in Topeka and Leavenworth, and a few others, as well as some members of our agency. But I can definitely defer that to Director Turner, and he can get you the exact makeup as much as he can. I know that obviously the non-disclosure statements, but I believe the people that were on that committee, that's no secret. So, yes,
Do you know the makeup of the three-member selection?
I do. It was the lead architect and engineer, Director Turner, and the superintendent of one of our homes. That was the final committee.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Representative. Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for letting us testify.
Are there any other opponents? Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Any opponents? Any neutrals? Any discussion? Guess you want to get out early, don't you? That concludes the hearing on 2378. And before we close, I want to remind you on Thursday, we're going to do final action on the two bills we heard today. We're going to have a hearing on 2392, which is rather long and difficult. Representative Dotson is going to make our way easy and let us understand that. We're also going to hear Senate Bill 39, and Representative Butler is going to help us through that. That's the same bill that we heard before. Is that correct, Representative Butler? Same commas, same period?
All the way down. I've held them up to the light. It's exact.
We'll invite Senator Elaine Bowers to come over. She might want to testify. So anyway, we'll have a hearing on 2392 and hopefully maybe get rid of 39 and send it on to the leadership. And we only have 2 more meetings. And remind you that Wednesday night is possible snowing. So if you're driving in Thursday, be careful. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Second. Oh, I better say I'm ready to get out here too. All in favor, say aye. Thank you. All opposed? We are